Good morning to viewers here in the U.S. and around the world. It's Monday, August 8th, and I'm Brianna Keilar alongside John Berman this morning. A big win for President Biden and for Democrats. The Inflation Reduction Act, the centerpiece of the president's long-stalled economic agenda, passing the Senate on a party line vote, with Vice President Harris breaking a 50-50 tie.
So this represents the largest investment to fight the climate crisis in U.S. history. It has major health care provisions. It caps prescription drug expenditures for seniors at $2,000. It allows Medicare to negotiate some prices of drugs. And it has some new tax provisions as well, including a 15% minimum tax on some of the country's largest corporations.
Now, the bill now heads to the House for a vote. And joining us now is Brian Deese. He is the director of the White House National Economic Council. Brian, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Is the president going to be out aggressively selling this legislation to the public, and what is that going to look like?
Well, the president will be talking about this and explaining it absolutely to the American people. And what it will look like is trying to explain in very practical terms why this matters for people's lives. We have for decades been debating the idea of allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices. But why it's so important is it will mean that millions of Americans can actually access those prescriptions they need at lower costs. We've been debating for decades and trying for decades to really address the climate crisis in the way that we need. But what that means for families is lower energy costs, lower utility bills, making it easier to access things like energy efficient upgrades for their homes, energy efficient appliances, and the like. So the president our entire team will be out making the case. Obviously, right now, we're focused on the last steps in this process, getting the bill through the House and to the president's desk for signature.
When you say out, you mean he'll be traveling?
Well, certainly the president is going to be out around the country on these issues. I don't have any specific announcements to make on travel, but you can expect that he'll be out in the country in the coming weeks on this.
Okay, so it's going to take some time for some of these provisions to kick in. Obviously, these are big provisions, specifically on prescription drugs. That $2,000 out-of-pocket cap doesn't start until 2025, as we understand. Medicare negotiation phasing in between 2026 to 29. How does this help Americans in the immediate future?
Well, it's a great question, and one of the important things about the way this bill was designed was to provide both immediate relief and also address long-standing challenges. So, for example, on immediate relief, this fall, 13 million Americans will see lower health care premiums as a result of this bill, about $800 in savings. And those benefits will go beyond those 13 million Americans because it will mean more affordable health care coverage. So people going into the fall and winter can rest a little easier knowing they'll have access to health care. And at the same time, to your point, it takes on long-standing challenges of allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug prices, which will take some time. But we've been waiting decades to put this reform into place, and we're going to do it right to make sure that those benefits are felt for the long term.
Starting next year, those drug companies that raise prices of drugs faster than inflation, which happens quite a lot, are going to have to pay a rebate to Medicare if they do that. Could we be seeing those companies rushing to hike prices before that?
Certainly, Medicare has the authorities to make sure that if they do so, that they will be strongly disincentivized from doing so. But look, the provision that you just described and the broader bill are going to result in lower costs for Medicare, and that means lower costs for consumers as well. And that's another point that's important here for your viewers. Reducing costs in Medicare is one of the ways that this bill actually reduces the federal deficit. And when we reduce the deficit, we are helping on the inflation front as well, because that's complementary to what the Fed is trying to get done. So in addition to lower costs for consumers, we're also lowering the cost to the federal balance sheet. Both of those are important at this moment.
How does Medicare stop them from doing that before this goes into effect?
Well, if they do that, then the rebate that they will have to pay will just
No,
be
I'm talking about between
larger.
when the rebate doesn't kick in until next year. So between now and then, how would Medicare stop them from raising it?
The drug prices for this year are already already set with Medicare.
Okay, so they're not going. They have no wiggle room to do that.
Correct. This bill will put them in a position where going forward, we can't go back on where we are this year, and going forward, they will have Medicare will now have the leverage to make sure that if they do raise prices quicker, then ultimately that cost is not borne by Medicare or borne by consumers.
Okay, and then I know that's certainly reassuring to people who are paying those prices. The president said that there's going to be a student loan forgiveness announcement this month. When are we expecting that?
You've heard the president speak about this issue. I'm not going to get ahead of any decision he's made or any announcement. I don't have one of those for you today. But the issue is something that he has been focused on for some time, and he will speak to it when he's prepared to do so.
This month?
Well, I will leave the president's statements and president's words on that to speak for themselves, and he will have more to say about it, and I'll have more to say about it when he makes that decision.
Okay, great. And then Karine Jean-Pierre said on Thursday that those China tariffs that were instituted by former President Trump were a bad deal. That's what she called them, a bad deal. So why hasn't the president reversed them yet?
Look, I think you need to look at that issue in the context of our overall international economic policy. And the president ran for office, came into office, reflecting the fact that the prior administration's approach to China and to international economic issues wasn't serving middle-class families, wasn't serving manufacturing companies here in the United States. And he has changed that fundamentally by working with our partners and allies and by going at the core challenges that China really does pose to our economy. And if you look at what we're doing just this week, we're taking big steps on that front. The CHIPS and Science Bill that the president will sign tomorrow is the biggest investment in our industrial base and in U.S. manufacturing in modern history. And a lot of that is designed to make sure that we have the capacity to build semiconductors here in the United States with secure supply chains that aren't reliant on China.
Are you saying he might let the tariffs stand?
I'm saying that that's an issue that we are looking at, the president is investigating, and we'll have an answer on that question when he's prepared to do so. But you need to look at that issue in the context of a much broader economic strategy vis-a-vis strengthening our own economic position in relation to China.
All right, Brian, appreciate you making the time this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I want to bring in CNN chief political correspondent and co-anchor of State of the Union, Dana Bash. Nice to see you this morning.
Good morning. Happy Monday.
Thank you. So I was joking earlier that a headline this morning could be Democrats in array, right? Over the weekend, they passed the Inflation Reduction Act, and this follows several weeks of getting stuff passed here. How much of a difference do you think, A, this could make to the American people, B, this could make for Democrats heading into the midterms?
Well, first of all, it is what you just described. It is a series of very important accomplishments. The capstone thus far, of course, what happened yesterday, which is this huge economic package, with a lot of what Brian Dees was just talking about, a lot of the promises that Democrats have made. Some of them didn't make it into the package, but a lot did, more than anybody had thought even just a few weeks ago. The question that you asked about how much of a difference is it going to make, the jury is still out on that. And I've been actually thinking about this morning. Brianna, remember when we were covering Obamacare?
Oh, yes. Fondly. Actually, I loved working with you back then.
On the Hill. And this was an issue that Democrats said it was partisan. No Republicans voted for it. Democrats said over and over, this is going to help you. This is going to make your lives better. And then what happened in the midterms? It was President Obama's first midterm election. They got shellacked. I think that was the word that he used. And the reason is because people didn't feel it yet. And then what happened, I don't know, not even 10 years later when Republicans were in control and they tried to overturn it, they couldn't. And they couldn't largely because people actually liked it. These things take time, and that is not conducive to an election that is 3 months away or even 2 years away. And that is just the reality. The other thing is it's how people feel. ABC has a poll out that they conducted just, I think, Friday and Saturday. 69% of Americans say that they don't think the economy is going well. That's 7 in 10 Americans. And it's what you've been talking about all morning. It's because people just feel bad when it comes to the economy, which is the most important thing. If you're going to the grocery store and you can't afford food, if you're going to fill up your car and you can't afford gas, or never mind housing. And so those are things that are going to take some time to turn around. And that is just the reality that Democrats are facing.
We want to ask you as well, Do you want to talk about these toilet
Oh, yeah,
pictures?
sure. I'll ask about the pictures.
Yeah.
Maggie Axios published some of Maggie Haberman's reporting. Maggie had earlier reported that White House staffers had found documents in Trump's toilets that looked like they were flushed down, intentionally disposed of. And now Axios posted these photos this morning of what certainly appear to be documents. One of these toilets is in the White House. Another one is during some kind of a trip. And I know people are going to make all kinds of toilet jokes here, but the bottom line is these are documents that are supposed to be preserved that are being destroyed here, Dana.
It's not legal. I mean, there is a law that is in place since the era post-Nixon that you have to preserve presidential records. And that is the people who work in the White House and the man who was elected to the White House. And that is the rule, which is why you have seen reporting from Maggie and others. The then president had a habit of ripping things up and throwing them in the trash. His aides would come quickly along and take them out of the trash and tape them back together because that is the law of the land. This looks nefarious. We don't know the specifics. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to the bottom of what exactly was in there because you're going to have the former president cop to it, and there's no indication that that is something that he would do. But I was zooming in on my phone on these pictures. I'm sure you guys were also.
Yeah.
It's a Sharpie, and it looks like Donald Trump's handwriting. It looks like it. Can we prove it? Are we handwriting experts? No. But it's just not legal. Full stop.
Yes. Sparkling clean toilets, thank God, I have to say. So this could be much worse.
I just little things.
I just want to put that out there. You had some great interviews this weekend on State of the Union, including you spoke with Lindsey Graham about whether he would support Donald Trump in 2024. I want to play this clip.
I think he was a consequential president. If you compare his policies to what's going on today, I think he's got a hell of a story to say. I think we should look at election integrity measures to make sure some problems don't happen again. But if he runs for president, talking about 2020 is not what people want to hear.
So interesting. He says election integrity, even as he says move on.
Mm-hmm. He's actually one of those few Trump supporters who's not an election denier. Mm-hmm. He says the election was not stolen. Joe Biden won the presidency, full stop. And what he did, in addition to that clip, is look into the camera and basically say, Donald Trump, stop talking about 2020. That hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. I mean, just this weekend, he spoke at CPAC, and he was even further down the election live rabbit hole than he has been recently, because he had this huge crowd of people who were just eating up the conspiracy theories, and not just from him, but from other people. So this is just the reality that Republicans are going to have to deal with if, in fact, Donald Trump runs, and if, in fact, he gets the nomination. That this is why all of this talk about what happened in 2020 and the Trump presidency isn't ancient history. It could be the future, and it is about the most slippery slope that you can think of for a lot of these Republicans.
Look, if Lindsey Graham thinks he's being successful as a Trump whisperer, it doesn't appear to be working.
Not on that issue.
I'm not sure it's ever worked, at least not the way he thinks it has. You asked the same type of question to Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut when it comes to President Biden and whether or not Senator Blumenthal would support Biden running for re-election in 2024. And I want people to watch this. I think this follows a long exchange where you basically had to just drag an answer out of him. So let's listen.
I think this November is going to determine how successful President Biden is in the next 2 years and how strong he would be as a candidate.
Your non-answer is going to likely be perceived as an intentional dodge. You won't say, yes, I support President Biden. Is that where you want it to be?
I will support President Biden.
Do you want him to run?
If he decides he wants to run, and I think his decision will be determined by how November ends for the Democratic Party and for senators like myself who are running for re-election.
I think I followed that, Dana, there, but it was interesting how kind of torturous the answer was.
And for so many Democrats, I actually think that what he said at the end there was the most illuminating, which is President Biden's likely going to decide based on how bad or not so bad things end up after Election Day this year, 3 months from now. And, we don't know if he's right. What we do know is that the message from the White House is that President Biden intends to run. I talked to Kamala Harris, I don't know, maybe now 2 months ago, and she said, full stop, he's running, she's going to be on the ticket. But the reason why these questions are being asked, I didn't just sort of ask it out of the blue, is because you have other Democrats who are on the ballot from South Carolina, which is obviously a very red state, to Minnesota, a couple of Congress people there who are so-called frontliners saying that they don't think that Joe Biden should run. And so this is a debate that is happening. And it's not because the accomplishments that we talked about at the beginning are not long legislatively. It's not because there are not other things that he has done that Democrats very much support. There are lots of other factors that they are considering.
Dana Bash, it was fun to see those interviews. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me, guys.
And joining us now is CNN senior national security correspondent Alex Marquardt and former spokeswoman for the U.S. mission to the UN and former National Security Council Middle East Director Hagar Shmali, who is with us. Alex, does Russia have an appreciation for the risk here? Are they acting like that? And how fragile is this situation?
Well, it's extremely fragile. You heard the Secretary General there calling it suicidal potentially, and the head of the EIEA saying that this is a small miracle, that nothing worse has happened. This seems to be a bit of a cynical ploy by Russia to accuse the Ukrainians of bombing the facility. Of course, the Ukrainians are accusing the Russians of doing it. We have seen the Russians putting their forces, their weapons, their vehicles in civilian areas for protection, assuming that the Ukrainians are not going to fire on those facilities. This is obviously the most dangerous one now here. What we have, according to multiple authorities, are rockets and mortars being fired on 174 casks of spent fuel and 3 radiation detectors that were destroyed. You heard David McKenzie there talking about no radiation being detected yet, but those detectors, if they are destroyed, that could really weaken their ability to see if there is some kind of nuclear disaster. So this, according to the Ukrainians, the Russians sent their troops underground as this attack started. So it does appear to be, he said, she said, of course, but the Russians are really trying to make it look like the Ukrainians are going after this biggest nuclear power plant in Europe and creating a very, very potentially dangerous situation. We've seen all kinds of destruction, of course, across Ukraine. This could be one of the most dangerous situations we've seen yet.
Just following all the others, right? And Alex used the phrase a cynical ploy here, Hagar. Is there any sign the Russians are being pushed back here? They've been making this concerted effort in the Donbass. They seem to be making up ground there as much as they want. And in the south, this offensive we've been hearing about from Ukraine hasn't materialized to the extent that I think some had hoped.
Right. You have the Ukrainian military has seized back certain villages in certain areas, and it's largely in part due to the military equipment they've received from the West. So you have that, but I always am very cautious about overstating Ukrainian advances here and overstating also Russian losses. They have lost a lot of troops. Yes, they lost a lot of equipment, but there are a lot of tools in their toolbox they haven't used yet. They have an entire other army on the eastern side of their country that hasn't even been deployed yet. They have more foreign mercenaries that they've used. They have their own mercenaries and others that they've used. I look at the attacks on this nuclear plant as signaling 3 things. Because first, the Russian government knows very well what it's doing. It survived. It went through Chernobyl. They're not idiots. They know how criminal this move is. But their entire tactic is to terrorize civilians and terrorize the country to bend to its demands. And they're not going to stop at anything to do that. That's their goal. That's their message. And the second 2 parts are that they are not done in the east, that once they seize control of that, they're going to continue into central Ukraine. They're not done with their mission. And the third is that this war could really linger. And we have to all be prepared for that.
And can I just note that Zaporizhia is an area that is not fully under the control of the Russians, that the Russians are very much trying to take over. It is in the middle of the country, and this is one of the areas where we believe Russia is going to try to hold a sham referendum to officially, in their mind, annex it.
which makes it even more dangerous, right? The how tenuous it is there. I want to talk about Israel and this ceasefire that we're seeing. So Israel and Islamic Jihad have reached this ceasefire after a few days of fighting. How is this conflict different?
So, well, it didn't expand or go or even seem at risk of getting out of control. Usually, when I was at the White House, we had a few times where there were spats between Israel and Hamas, Israel and other militants, or Israel and Lebanon. In fact, I was there when they had spats there as well. And the first thing the U.S. government does is rush in Washington, in Tel Aviv, rush to call for a ceasefire. And the reason is because the U.S. gets very concerned about any kind of conflict that could spiral out of control. Why? Because it's not good for Israel, obviously, but also because the U.S. has a defense pact with Israel. So we don't want to be roped into anything. But with this one, the difference was it did seem like a very targeted mission. I will tell you that the Israelis usually, while they're very receptive to American meetings, they will unapologetically finish their mission. And when they've reached a ceasefire, it usually means that they feel that they achieved their mission, or at least the most of it.
And there may be a political impact inside Israel, Alex.
There could be. Yeah, we have a new prime minister in Israel, Yair Lapid, who does not have a military or national security background.
Which is rare.
Which is very rare. Benny Gantz, the defense minister, he's a former general, so he certainly has those credentials. But the question remains to what extent, was there a calculation in Lapid's mind? This was a preemptive strike by Israel that started on Friday. This was, 50 hours, so just over 2 days. Crisis was averted in that it could spiral out of control. I covered the Gaza war in 2014, which lasted more than 50 days. However, of course, there were, a lot of casualties. 44 Palestinians were killed. Israel saying most of them were Islamic Jihad militants. The health authorities in Gaza are saying at least 15 of them are children, and that there are other civilians. So this still is a tragedy, of course, because we're no closer to helping the people of Gaza have better lives or reaching any sort of longer-lasting peace deal. This was a short, thankfully, spurt of violence, one that could easily have spiraled out of control. It did not, and what's most interesting, guys, is that Hamas did not get involved in this. This was Israel against Islamic Jihad. Hamas said, essentially, we're not taking part. We're going to condemn this attack, but they did not want to get involved.
Alex and Hagar, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Time now for 5 things to know for your new day. Next stop, the House, after Senate Democrats passed the Inflation Reduction Act in a party line vote with Vice President Harris breaking a 50-50 tie. The sweeping economic package combats climate change, lowers health care costs, raises taxes on some billion-dollar corporations, and is being touted as a move to lower the federal deficit.
Photos obtained by the New York Times' Maggie Haberman for her new book on the Trump presidency, actually on Donald Trump's entire career. These photos appear to show the White House records, some White House records, in the toilet. White House staff believe that Trump put them in there and made a habit of it. Trump has denied it.
And the national spotlight for Florida's governor about to get brighter. We have just learned that Ron DeSantis will headline rallies for Republican candidates in Arizona, New Mexico, Ohio, and Pennsylvania here in the coming weeks.
A sheriff in North Carolina is planning to house AR-15 rifles in every school campus this fall for emergencies. Buddy Harwood of Madison County says he has the support of the county commissioner, school board, and superintendent, but critics of his plan say rifles in schools would be dangerous for children.
Actor Roger E. Mosley, best known for his role as the affable and capable helicopter pilot Theodore T.C. Calvin on the 80s TV show Magnum P.I., has died at the age of 83. His family says he was in critical condition after a car crash left him paralyzed last week.
And the most famous helicopter in television, brown, yellow, orange. Our thoughts are with his family. Those are the 5 things to know for your new day. More on these stories all day on CNN and CNN.com. Don't forget to download the 5 Things podcast every morning. Go to CNN.com/5things.